Hello and welcome to this new video about learning Spanish. Today we are going to look at some online and free ways to learn Spanish, mostly for beginners. If you just start learning Spanish, if you are planning to start learning Spanish, or if you're on your journey but looking for some advice, then in the next few minutes I think I can share some really good tips for you. Just stay here. To give some background, I've been learning Spanish for exactly 4 years, and last week I took my C1 exam. I must have passed it, but I'll be waiting until the results before making a more particular video about the exam, and the results will arrive during the summer. I've always been a bit hesitant when it comes to making a video about Spanish, Italian, because those are languages that I was super privileged in because of my French. And right now I speak C2 French, C1 Italian, and hopefully C1 Spanish. I was going to say Swedish, but no, I don't speak C1 Swedish, but selbstverständliche Prophezeiung, I speak C1 Swedish. I've always been asking myself questions like, is my advice even relevant to people? But then I thought, like, why wouldn't it be? Like, anyone could learn Spanish using the resources that you did, and probably with your tips, they would be even better. So I'm making this video, and super soon I will make this video for Italian. Everyone is asking for it, and I'm literally living in Italy. Who's going to make this video if I don't do it? To start with, please don't worry if you don't speak any Portuguese, French, or Italian. If you have at least intermediate English, that's still going to help you. The most important thing here is the work that you're going to do while learning Spanish, not the things that you have done before. So yeah, some people are probably going to learn Spanish easier, but if you're not one of them, we are still fine. When I started learning Spanish back in 2020, I watched this channel. I took notes of everything he was saying. I have my notebook in Istanbul. I wish I had it right now to show. His videos are super old, and I know that it can be pretty boring to watch that kind of videos, and I know that in my videos I always just find the weirdest channels on YouTube and I'm like, I learned Spanish from this. And then you have like no other choice but to watch their videos. And you know, Spanish grammar is a bit complicated. We're going to talk about this, and he makes things super easier. But then my followers recommended me something else, mostly for beginners but still for everyone, streaming Spanish, that I didn't know until they recommended me, because like I guess when I was studying Spanish actively in 2020, the channel wasn't super popular, and after 2020 I kind of like never studied Spanish until my exam. So recently I just took a look at their channel to see what everyone was talking about, and I saw that their channel is mostly built on comprehensible input, which is super important language learning. They will make videos in Spanish, but like making super clear what they're talking about, and by time you will start understanding Spanish because you're constantly exposed to content in Spanish. But the only remark I'd like to make here is that I don't really appreciate the approach that completely ignores the grammar, and I think for language like Spanish, grammar is essential. So maybe watch the two channels that I recommended simultaneously and not like only one of them, which like one of them is more grammar centered and the other one comprehension. But I also know that language teachers and polyglots have like super different opinions when it comes to language learning because we have different experiences. But as a polyglot who speaks several languages, I would say that, especially Spanish, you should study some grammar because language learning is not always supposed to be super fun. So I think as grown adults, you can just go through some struggle and study Spanish grammar to eventually be fluent in Spanish. Of course, the grammar itself doesn't make you speak because you will need a lot of other things, but without the grammar, your puzzle is going to miss a lot of pieces. But still, if you just don't want to learn it, then I can't do anything about that. And I want to mention a book that's the only Spanish textbook that I use, because like textbooks aren't like my thing. There are a lot of better resources that we can use to learn languages, and if that's not my only option, like in Swedish, like there's nothing else than restart to learn Swedish, but in Spanish it's not like that. Like you can watch anything on YouTube. So the only Spanish textbook I ever used was this one. You can find in the description. I don't know if it's okay for me to share about this, but they literally put it on Google, so probably there are better books out there, but if you want something free and online, I think this is the best one. Other than that, in the description of this video, I'm going to mention some YouTube channels that are super useful to learn Spanish, my opinion and the opinion that I got from my followers. Make sure that you are at the same time like learning Spanish basics from anywhere you want, from those channels I mentioned, from your language course, from your teacher, anything, and you're also practicing Spanish watching that kind of channels. Channels that teach Spanish, channels that don't necessarily teach Spanish, but you should be watching something else. And also, everything you learn, make sure to do some exercise after learning them, but most importantly, learn them with good examples. Your brain will first remember the example that you saved earlier, and then it will try to create something accordingly. So make sure that your resources, your examples are pretty well built, and also do some exercises. Save all the examples that look useful to you. In the description of this video, I'm going to leave some Spanish websites that you can use to practice grammar, vocabulary, reading. Like, they all have different structures and different objetivos, but you can still use all of them for a lot of different Spanish levels. And I would also like to recommend some Spanish podcasts in the description. You will find the difficulty levels indicated, but something that I like to destacar is that Spanish language coach makes podcasts on different language levels. I listened to intermediate and advanced podcasts when I was preparing for the exam. But the best thing is he puts the transcripts on his website. That's not something that every creator does, and they're not supposed to make it, but he does this and you can use it freely, so I'm mentioning it here. Especially if you feel that your Spanish is improving, or if you already speak Italian or French, I would recommend you to check the intermediate podcast along with transcripts. Maybe just translate it first to your native language or to English, make a list of vocabulary, and then go and listen the entire thing. The most important thing with the podcasts is you're listening to them a lot of times, because in the first listen you are only going to try to understand what he's talking about. If you like to get some structures, get some vocabulary, get something useful, then you will have to listen to it a lot of times. I think just checking the description of this video, you can get access to a super complete list of Spanish resources, and anyone who watched this video can just make some contributions in the comment section. I always share the resources that I use to learn languages freely with people. Like, I'm not gatekeeping anything. Everything I ever used to learn Spanish, you can find in the description. And of course, it's completely up to you to make the true use of these resources, like using them regularly or studying properly and just paying attention to what you're doing. But of course, there are some super important points that maybe require the advice from another learner, and here I'm going to talk about some of them. While you're learning Spanish grammar, you're likely to have difficulty with two things. The first one is irregularities, the exceptions. The thing is, you are not expected to know all the conjugations after the first day of studying them. And for Spanish, there are like a lot of songs that will help you to memorize the verb conjugations. And something else that I could recommend is listen to actual Spanish songs, following the lyrics. Create yourself a playlist with normal Spanish songs, okay? I'm also like old Spanish music, that's why I'm talking like that. Create yourself a playlist with meaningful Spanish songs and then follow the lyrics, because they will have a lot of essential verbs, and in Spanish most of the essential verbs like to have, to be are irregular. But in the songs they're of course going to use these verbs a lot, and you can study the songs repeatedly because you will always be listening to them. So I think it's the best way to learn conjugations in any language. And other than that, something I had in Spanish and French is I had a conjugation notebook, a separate notebook than like the notebook that you have for grammar, vocabulary and anything. You just write verb conjugations here, and it's something good that you can just carry on while you're commuting. In your free times you can just take a look at it. And the best part of this notebook is probably after some time you won't need it because you will have learned everything. And the second thing that will cause you difficulties is subjuntivo. Here, something I'd like to highlight is if you are Italian or French speaker, yes, it's the subjuntivo that you know, but they use it a lot more. Like in French, we know subjuntivo, we know how to conjugate it, but do we use it? Not a lot. But in Spanish, like, it has a lot of places where it must be used, and you can't just think with your French logic or with your Italian logic, because our view of subjuntivo is super narrow. So at the beginning you are likely to make some errors while using subjuntivo or conjugating subjuntivo. Maybe as a solution, try to see Spanish as a different language, and then after time you will start just identifying all these peculiarities of the Spanish language. And other than that, something that's already causing you some troubles is probably how fast they speak. And in some languages I think it's easier to speak faster, and Spanish is probably one of them. But maybe the accents will also create some confusion. As we're talking about accents, many of you are also wondering if you should learn the Spanish from Spain or from Latin America. While I was learning Spanish, I just never paid attention to this because, like, let's be honest, like, I was 15 and I had like no idea, and my only goal was to learn Spanish, and I just wasn't like, I should learn this specific Spanish. Like, I just didn't think about it. But now many people tell me that my accent is more of Spain, even if like Spain has many different accents inside of the country. If it's like that, I never made a special effort to sound like the European Spanish, and you are completely free to choose which Spanish you want to learn. To me, the accents mostly sound like different people speaking Spanish, and I just don't take it as something super different that should cause me difficulties. So maybe just change your perspective and start thinking like me. I think that was all I could talk about today, and if you're a Spanish learner, if you stumble upon something interesting, please share it with everyone in the comments so we can all learn from each other. You can also follow me on social media where I share my language learning journey a little bit more regularly than YouTube. I'm wishing you a lot of success with your Spanish learning.